Chapter 10. The Missing Chapter. The fever came on a Wednesday, slipping into his room like an unwanted guest who refused to leave. And by Thursday morning, Elias had lost all purchase on the distinction between waking and dreaming. The hospital walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched the slow pulse of the morphine drip, and the fluorescent lights above his bed cast a pallor across everything, leaching color from the world, until only gray remained. He drifted through the hours in a haze of pain and medication, the boundaries between past and present dissolving like sugar in water, and somewhere in the depths of that dissolution, he began to write. Not on paper, not on a screen. The writing happened in his mind, a fevered monologue that poured out of him like blood from an open wound, and he had no control over it, no ability to stop it, no power to shape it into the careful, measured arguments that had defined his life. The words came raw and ragged, stripped of their philosophical armor, naked in a way that would have horrified him if he had possessed the clarity to be horrified. He wrote to Clara because Clara was the only one who mattered now. Clara was the only one who had ever mattered. Clara was the only one who had refused to leave him alone in the darkness. I was wrong about everything, he wrote, but you already know that. I told you in my letters, I told you in Chicago. I told you in the hospital corridor when I held Sophia's hand and felt the hope I had spent my life denying. But I don't think I told you the most important thing. I don't think I told you why I was wrong. Not really. Not the way I need to tell you now. The fever deepened, and the room around him dissolved into a swirl of memory and hallucination. He saw his mother, not as she had been in her final years, hollowed out by the sadness that had followed her like a shadow. But as she had been before, the sadness took hold. A young woman, with dark hair and bright eyes, laughing at something his grandmother had said, the laughter filling the kitchen with a warmth that he had almost forgotten. He saw his father, too, not the cold and distant man who had never been able to show affection, but a younger version of that man, a version that might have been capable of love if he had known how, if he had been shown, if the world had been kinder to him. I was wrong about the asymmetry of pain, he wrote, and the words came with a clarity that surprised him, cutting through the fog of the fever like a blade through silk. I thought that the absence of pleasure was not a harm unless there was a being to miss it. I thought that non-existence was preferable to existence because existence contained suffering. I thought that I was being rational, that I was being ethical, that I was protecting the unborn from the cruelty of the world. But I forgot something. I forgot that the absence of pleasure is also an absence of love. I forgot that the absence of joy is also an absence of connection. I forgot that the absence of suffering is also the absence of the fierce, desperate, beautiful struggle that gives life its meaning. I forgot that non-existence is not peace. Non-existence is nothing, and nothing is not better than something. Nothing is just nothing. He thought about Sophia, about the spark in her eyes that had refused to die, about the drawings she had shown him, about the sentence she had written at the bottom of the page. I am going to get better. He thought about the hope that had radiated from those words, the hope that was irrational and foolish, the hope that was the most human thing he had ever seen. He thought about his sister, and the way she had held his hand in the hospital, the way she had refused to let go, the way she had shown him that love was not a trap, but a gift that could not be earned or deserved, a gift that simply was. The fever knows things, he wrote, and the words came out slurred, disjointed, the words of a man who was losing his grip on coherence. The fever knows what I was too afraid to admit. The fever knows that I built my philosophy because I was afraid. I was afraid of loss. I was afraid of pain. I was afraid of the vulnerability that comes with loving anything that can be taken away. And so I told myself that love was an illusion. I told myself that attachment was a trap. I told myself that the only honest response was to turn away. But the fever knows the truth. The fever knows that I was a coward. The fever knows that I was so afraid of losing that I refused to have anything to lose. And in refusing, I lost everything anyway. He saw his grandmother, her face soft and kind, her hands warm against his back, her voice gentle as she told him the truth about the sparrow. He saw her the way she had been when he was 9 years old, a small woman with gray hair and a face that had been weathered by grief, but who had never stopped believing in the possibility of joy. He saw her the way she had been on the day the sparrow died, the day he had learned that the world was cruel, the day he had built his first wall. He saw her and he heard her voice, and the voice was telling him something he had never understood until now. The bird was not the whole story, he wrote, and the words came faster now, tumbling over each other in their urgency. The bird was not the whole story. The bird was just one moment, one terrible moment, one moment that I allowed to define my entire life. But there were other moments. There were moments of joy. There were moments of love. There were moments when the world was not cruel, when the suffering was not unbearable, when the struggle was worth it. I forgot those moments. I forgot them because I was too afraid to remember. I forgot them because remembering would have meant admitting that I was wrong. And I could not admit that I was wrong. I could not admit that I had spent my life building a lie. The fever broke on Friday, and Elias woke to find his sister sitting beside his bed, her face pale with exhaustion, her eyes red from crying. The room was quiet, the machines were silent, and the fluorescent lights had been dimmed to a soft, gentle glow that made the space feel almost peaceful. He looked at Clara, at the familiar lines of her face, at the gray in her hair, at the love that radiated from her like light, and he felt the words that had been building inside him rise to the surface. Clara, he said, and his voice was hoarse, cracked from disuse. I need to ask you something. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. She leaned forward, taking his hand, her fingers warm against his cold, trembling flesh. Anything, she said. You can ask me anything. He paused. The question was enormous. The question was impossible. The question was the one he had been running from his entire life. But the fever had stripped away his defenses, had left him raw and exposed, had forced him to confront the truth that he had been avoiding. And now, lying in the hospital bed with his sister's hand in his, he knew that he had to ask. Is it worth it? He said. All of it. The suffering, the pain, the loss, the certainty of death. Is it worth it? Is the joy worth the price? She looked at him, and he saw the struggle playing out in her face, the battle between the desire to comfort and the need to be honest. She was not a philosopher. She was not a theorist. She was simply a woman who had lived, who had loved, who had lost, and who had found the courage to keep going. I don't know, she said, and her voice was quiet, raw, the voice of someone who had asked herself the same question 1,000 times. I don't know if it's worth it. I don't know if the joy is worth the price. I don't know if any of it makes sense. But I know that I'm glad I'm alive. I'm glad I got to live. I'm glad I got to love. I'm glad I got to be your sister. He felt the tears come, slow and warm, coursing down his cheeks like a river that had been dammed for decades. He felt the weight of everything he had carried, everything he had denied, everything he had refused to acknowledge. And he felt it lift, just slightly, just enough to let him breathe. Clara, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I'm sorry for the years of silence. I'm sorry for the arguments. I'm sorry for pushing you away. I'm sorry for all of it. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him, her body warm against his, her voice soft in his ear. I know, she said. I know. And I forgive you. I forgive you, Elias. I've always forgiven you. I was just waiting for you to let me. He fell asleep in her arms, and when he woke, she was gone. He was dying. He was alone. But he was not afraid. Not anymore. The fear had been burned away by the fever, by the confession, by the love that had found him in the darkness. The fear was gone, and in its place was something else. He closed his eyes. He let the silence wash over him. He let the peace settle into his bones. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to let go.